almost as if we're kind of predetermined to find specific people um that match our personality, or or at least that balance out our personality. Because when we talk about matching, we automatically think of finding someone that's completely like us, right? Like does the same things and stuff like that. But I think in order to be an actual connection, not just a compatibility aspect, there needs to be something more than that. It's the mixture, the combination of personalities, the combination of lifestyles, the combination of beliefs. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Out of the Box podcast, where Steve and I, your host, get to talk about outside the box ideas. Today, we have a pretty interesting topic. It's going to be the Myers-Briggs test, personality test, and how that affects your relationships. So, without further ado, we'll kind of explain a little bit about what Myers-Briggs test is. So Myers-Briggs test is basically a personality test that focuses on four different areas. Your level of extroversion, if you're more of a thinker, a feeler, if you're also more of um, analyst, or are you more of just kind of a perspective kind of person, more philosophical in that sense. So it covers different areas. And still maybe we can later put on like an image of what those areas are.
Sure.
But um, but yeah, so the Myers-Briggs test is basically a personality test, and one of the interesting things that I was kind of reading up on was that this test, or personality test, sometimes can help you match with a partner, a correct partner, in terms of romantic relationship. And it also goes to show that we tend to gravitate towards certain personalities when we look for friends as well. So that is something interesting as well. But we're kind of going to cover a little bit more of the romantic side, the romantic relationships, and how that ties in all together.
Yeah, exactly.
So,
So those
um,
four areas you were talking about, it says sensation, intuition, feeling, and thinking. That's bringing back some memories because I took it a long time ago in my undergrad. Yeah, and it was created by Carl Jung, psychiatrist, an early
ooh,
psychiatrist who was more on the leaning towards psychoanalytical, which was Sigmund Freud when he started that. But Carl Jung is very interesting. Jordan Peterson talks about him a lot. Everyone knows that who listens to him. Carl Jung is, I find him fascinating. I didn't find him as fascinating until I heard Jordan Peterson get more into it. And now I'm wanting to learn more about him. And I was reading one of his books called The Red Book. Not to get too far off topic, but just briefly, like
mhm.
the Red Book, Carl Jung talks about like archetypes and symbols, the collective unconscious, where all these symbols are stored across thousands of years of generations and passed down through stories and now movies. But yeah, it's interesting how he's tried to categorize all the symbols that humanity creates to understand the world. And so it kind of makes sense that he creates this personality test with looks like Isabel Briggs Myers, yeah, to try to figure out our personality. Like maybe it's somewhat symbolic when he was putting it together, like sensation, intuition, feeling, and thinking. It's interesting. And then coming up with those categories you mentioned earlier about introversion and extroversion and how those play a role.
Yeah, yeah, which is really interesting because one of the things that I was finding out, based on the research that different websites had created, was that most of the time, or at least part of the time, a lot of the personalities that would match would tend to be opposites of each other, almost to the point where you know it's like that yin yang kind of thing where the opposites attract. We've heard in previous, maybe family has said things like that, or family or friends have mentioned that opposites attract. which is interesting because, you know, of course, who wants to be living with somebody that is the same person? That just kind of blows away the fact that, you know, there could be anything interesting or anything to learn from, anything to show from a different perspective, right? If we both see the world the same way, then what am I gonna learn? I already know that personally, right? And so um I think that's very interesting that in a lot of these personality matching websites, specifically with the Myers-Briggs, it always happened to have the some opposites in some parts. Um, and so, what do you think about that, Steele? Like, is that something that any psychologist has mentioned, or anything that kind of catches your attention?
Yeah, I don't know if any psychologist has mentioned this off the top of my head, but I do know that like it makes sense when you think about it because it makes sense when you apply it to personality, I think, in some way. Now, it like one thing that makes sense to me immediately, and then jumping into psychology after that is immediately, I think introversion and extroversion from the Myers Briggs. It makes sense that an introvert would be maybe enjoying their company more of an extrovert because the extrovert naturally fills the silence that an introvert brings. Not to say that introverts are always silent, but when the introvert is less likely to talk, the extrovert's going to start the conversation and keep it going. Whereas the introvert, if there's an introvert and an introvert, like you were mentioning before, this was, if there's two introverts, they may not keep the conversation going. It might fall flat and it might stop, prematurely. Whereas if there's two extroverts, what you were saying is right. Like what
They
would
might
happen?
drain each other out, yeah,
Yeah,
by constantly just
yeah,
talking.
talking to each other, draining each other's energy. Even though it's interesting because extroverts get energy from other people, introverts it's the opposite.
Mhm.
They get drained by other people. So that also brings in the question of would the extrovert
And it's also because it's very interesting in the personality test. There's different levels of extroversion, different personalities or different combinations of personalities because there's like four sections and the combinations, depending on the combination, it goes to reflect different levels of introversion or extroversion. So there's some introverts that are more introverted than others, some introverts that are more extroverted, um,
different
and
level?
vice versa with the extroverts.
So
Some
it's
that are
not
very out there, and some that are very, more
completely.
introverted.
Yeah, it's not like only this, and some people might fall in the middle between them too.
Yeah,
More both.
yeah. And I was talking to one of my mentors, who she's done a little bit more research into this. You know her, Marcy,
Yeah.
and she's also an ENFP just like me. And she told me that we're actually the most introverted of all the
Uh,
extroverts,
mm,
which is
oh,
something that's interesting because I myself thought I was, partly an introvert. But she said that we're like, one personality away from,
from the
going
introvert.
into introverts. So that I have almost like a 51-49 kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah, it's like that you
51% extroverted, 41% introverted. So it's pretty interesting.
yeah, yeah, it
Uh,
makes you think.
One of the things that I've noticed also, with my girlfriend right now is that I was doing a personality test to see what personality best fit, with my potential partner or what would be the personality that most fit with my Myers-Briggs test. And she happens to have the personality that most matches
Oh, so that makes
my
sense.
personality, which is pretty crazy, right? Like because it said that um her personality itself is very rare. I think hers is INFJ, INFJ. And so
It's a little
so
different.
in itself, we match in the N and the F, which the F, I think it's the feeler. We were both
Yeah.
feelers. We feel compassion for other people, because some people tend to be more analytical. And then we also match in the N, which I don't know what specifically that was when you pulled it up.
Uh,
But in the other two sections, the I'm an extrovert and she's
oh,
an introvert.
yeah,
I'm
intuition.
sorry?
Yes,
Intuition. Yeah. So
right, exactly.
the internet intuition component. So for those people who are more interested in, learning about Myers-Briggs test or are curious about it, definitely recommend going to take the test and seeing what you get. Maybe just a self-awareness kind of thing. But I think that's it's curious because it's almost as if we're kind of predetermined to find specific people um that match our personality, or or at least that balance out our personality, because when we talk about matching we automatically think of finding someone that's completely like us, right? Like does the same things and stuff like that. But I think in order to be an actual connection, not just a compatibility aspect, there needs to be something more than that. It's the mixture, the combination of personalities, the
It's
combination of
more,
lifestyles, the combination of beliefs,
it's more complicated.
and so
Yeah, you pointed out that even though you and your girlfriend were slightly opposite on some things, there was at least I think two things you pointed out that you were the same or at least very similar on. So it's not completely the
mhm,
opposite. It's and maybe it's not fair to say it's the opposite, but maybe it's more fair to say um
it
like
balances.
balancing. Yeah, maybe it's balancing. Like some of it's some differences and then some similarities, just enough. Because if you want to go to psychology, social psychology says like people who are similar to each other, the more similar they are, maybe not perfectly, but similarities tend to attract more than people who are not similar to each other. But just in
Mm,
almost everything, friendships, relationships, like in terms of physical appearance, like people who are similar in appearance be more likely to sit next to each other, to talk to each other. Like, even if you pick up on because you know this as a communications, we're both communication majors. Nonverbals doesn't just mean moving around; it means the clothing we wear. So
yeah,
someone wearing I don't know, a baseball cap with their favorite
like a
basketball.
hot pink or something.
Yeah, like or like their favorite basketball team, right? And they see someone else wearing their favorite basketball team shirt.
Mm,
They're more likely to
yeah.
sit next to each other than someone who's just wearing no hat at all and they're just wearing a t-shirt, because it's similar is kind of attractive a little bit.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. Yeah, I think that goes to show that because how we wear things, how we adorn, I guess our choose our clothing or our closet or what we wear, you know, I guess that's our inner selves trying to express. And so when we find other people that express themselves the same way, we know that it's almost like a safe heaven, or a place where you're not going to be judged by what you wear. You're going to be almost accepted, I guess, that you find your clique, you find your community.
And
um
it makes sense because we both like this, and then you just start a conversation about what you both like.
mhm, yeah.
I'm not saying
Yeah,
everything.
like you said, the same basketball team, like, hey, like, do
Yeah,
you are you also a fan? Like,
yeah,
that's happened to me before. I one of my ex-girlfriends, she let me borrow her her Cowboys football team sweater, and I happened to wear it on a really cold day, and then everybody was asking me about the football game and this and that, and I was just like I
yeah. Like
don't personally watch football, but I was like, oh, okay, yeah, like
all it takes.
kind of talking to them, and what one person told me I would tell it to the other person. So kind of
Sweet.
found a way to like
Right.
connect. But people do go as far as you know to say like that they feel almost like they found a friend when they see somebody wearing the same thing or something similar, right? So I can definitely understand what you mean about like the similarities also can be attractive,
It's a
even
balance.
in a romantic relationship.
It's definitely a balancing act, I think. Another
Yeah.
thing in psychology is Bowlby's attachment theory, which is about early childhood formation, attachment formations with the caregiver. And we say caregiver because every situation is different. Sometimes a kid doesn't have a parent. Sometimes they're in an orphanage, foster care. Sometimes they just have a single parent. So caregiver is a general term, right? So those early experiences with the caregiver, the way the caregiver treats the child matters, and it makes a difference in the way
Mm.
the child will develop the ways they view relationships in the future when they're growing up as a teenager, when they're an adult. So like let's say they're abused when they're really young, a child, an infant, somewhere in that area, right? Or even when they're a little bit older, they might form a negative attachment of relationships with people. They might view all relationships, generalize it to all relationships, because the caregiver relationships where we form our beliefs about relationships. So they might form a belief that people are gonna always abuse me in relationships.
Or they're gonna
So
leave me or something.
yeah, they get insecure, and so that there's a reason why it comes from certain patterns and things like that.
Yeah. And
That
it's interesting because when right now when you told me about your Myers-Briggs test, you said that, one time when you took it, it said that you were an extrovert, but then the second time you took it, it said it was an introvert.
yeah, I'm trying to remember. Like
So it's interesting that maybe it changed a little bit, but it brings up the question, like, can we is our personality altered? Can it be altered,
that's a good question.
by
Yeah,
life
actually,
happenings?
psychology has answered.
Because some people might say like, "Oh, you're just born with it," but like, is
Yeah,
it moldable?
so it depends on what we're talking about. If we're talking about a personality disorder from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, then the personality disorder has for part of the diagnostic criteria is personality disorder has to exist for a long time. It has to be stable characteristics that do not change. So you can't diagnose someone with a personality disorder if the personality changes, right? So it has to be stable.
Mm,
That's why therapists often say personality disorders are the hardest ones to treat because it's really hard to just completely get rid of someone's personality. The best you can do is try to help them manage better. But at the same time, what you're saying is there's a general personality, our personalities, me and you, other people who do not have personality disorders. Can their personality change? And that's a good question. Maybe it can. I would think it's possible. I think when like someone who goes through a war, through a traumatic experience,
mm,
part of them changes. So
yeah.
maybe that can change the personality in some way.
Yeah,
Beyond some,
like some people that lose a loved one,
yeah,
they just, you know, they go into depression, and that depression itself chemically it alters the body, or the stress that going through a traumatic situation
yeah,
uh can alter the body physically as well, right? Because we know what stress can do. It can physically also change you. So if it can physically change you, then it could eventually change your personality, right? Because some people, lost a loved one. Let's say one of my friends, he lost his brother, and so after that, he stopped playing music. He also, changed completely. He started working out. He started, doing different things that he was usually not used to, because everything he almost like left the life that was with his brother, almost to escape anything or everything that would remind him back to his brother, right? And so he basically turned into a different person, because if he wasn't a different person, it would remind him of his brother, which would bring back that hurt, right?
yeah.
So it's pretty crazy.
Because life experiences can change our personality. Drug addiction can change our personality. You can go from
Mm,
someone who's completely not seeking drugs all the time to someone who is constantly trying to fulfill the never-ending desire when you're in that addictive state. And then even after an addiction, for a long enough time, you're using a substance hard every day can change the brain in physical ways, which can then change the personality in some ways too. Brain damage
yeah,
can change the personality. A lot
personality.
of things
Yeah.
can.
So any final thoughts on how personality actually can impact how we find potential mates or
Yeah,
romantic relationships?
I definitely think similar personalities could attract, but I think like we were also saying, if they're too similar, that might bring conflict and dissatisfaction in the relationship, like two extroverts, for example.
Yeah. And it also, I think there's also a good balance, right? It's finding that good balance in personalities. And I think, psychologists in a way have found, I guess something close to it of with this test, for example, the Myers-Briggs test, of finding personalities that could mesh together really well, because there's different personalities that are very creative, more creative than others. There's different personalities that are more that need certain energy, right? Energy levels than the others. So it's pretty cool how they have kind of found those different matches. But like you said, there's that balance, and those similarities for sure can also tend to be attractive. Um,
Yeah.
and yeah, I mean, there is things that do alter your personality that can eventually impact potentially how you find a mate, or if you find a mate. And so yeah, those were my final thoughts. Thank you guys for listening in. Let us know what you think about this topic. Does personality actually impact your relationship? Is your relationship similar to you? We would like to know. We're also experimenters and like to learn about other people's life experiences, so please feel free to leave a comment down below. Also, if you like this video, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, because we are definitely committed to bringing you more content, outside of the box ideas that will surely impact your life. So until next time, we will talk to you